Hey everyone, it's time to put your thinking caps on because today we're going to talk about adding integers. This is a little bit more difficult, so make sure you're paying attention. Before we get into our strategies to add integers, let's review what an integer is. An integer is all of our whole numbers, which include 0 and our positive numbers. And then integers also include the positive numbers opposites, which are our negative numbers, and those go this direction on a number line. Now to add integers, we have three strategies. One is to use counters, the second is to use a number line, and the third is to solve using absolute value. We'll also review what to do when the sign is the same when you're adding two numbers, when you have two negatives, or two positives, and then when you have a different sign, so when you have a negative plus a positive number. So let's get started. We're going to start with the same sign, and our first strategy is using counters. Counters are a great way to visually show what you are doing. Our red counters are going to represent our negative numbers, and the yellow counters will represent our positive numbers. These never change. Red is always negative and yellow is always positive. So here's our first example, -4 plus -3. We have the same sign, which is negative. Since our numbers are negative, we're going to use the red counters. So you can see that I've placed 4 red counters to start with. And then I'm adding -3. So I have another 3 red counters because they're negative. To find my answer, since they are all red, all I have to do is count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then write my answer as 7, and the sign is obviously going to be negative because all my counters are red. So I have 7 red counters, which represents -7. Here's our second example using a number line. Again, you can see we have the same sign, both are negative. -2 plus -4. When using a number line, you always start at 0 and move in the direction of the first number. Since our first number is -2, I will move towards the negative number 2 places and stop. My second number is also negative, so I will continue towards the negatives for 4 more places. And when I stop, I end at -6, which is my answer. It's important to remember that you may be asked to draw a number line to show how you found your answer. Using these arrows is how you show on a number line how many spaces you traveled each time. The last strategy uses absolute value. So here we have -4 plus -3. To use absolute value, you should add the absolute value of the integers, then use the common sign for your answer. So here we have the absolute value of -4 is 4, and the absolute value of -3 is 3. Because remember, absolute value is always positive. So 4 plus 3 equals 7. The second step is to use the common sign. Well, in our original problem, the common sign is a negative because we have -4 and -3. So our common sign is negative. We apply that and our answer becomes -7. Before you try some on your own, I'd like to do one more using absolute value. Remember, when the signs are the same and I have 2 negatives, I'm going to add the absolute value of both numbers. So the absolute value of -4 is 4, and the absolute value of -6 is 6. So 4 plus 6 equals 10. And then I take the sign that is common. So since both numbers are negative, I use a negative sign, and my answer becomes -10. Here are 3 questions for you to try on your own in your notebook. Try to use each of the 3 strategies, solving 1 using absolute value, 1 using counters, and 1 using a number line. The second part of the video talks about adding integers with different signs. Now this is just a reminder that red counters represent negative numbers and yellow represent positive. So here we have -3 plus 2. We have 3 negative counters represented by the red and 2 positive counters. When you have a positive and a negative number, you want to line up your counters like so that you can see where your pairs are. What I mean by a pair is one positive and one negative. If you think about these counters represent 1, if I have +1 plus -1, I'm going to end up at 0. And so when we line up our pairs, we can see our 0 pairs, and we can cancel them out. So here we have these cancel out and these cancel out because they're going to equal 0. And visually, we are left with one red counter, which means that our answer is 1, and since it's red, it is -1. When using a number line for different signs, the process is very similar. Remember that you start at 0 and look at your first number in the equation, which is +5. So we're going to move in the positive direction 5 spaces and then stop. Then we look at our second number, which is -3. Just like before, for our negatives, we are going to move towards the negative numbers, and that would be 3 spaces. So we move back 3 spaces, and we end at +2. For this example, we are working backwards. We're starting with the number line, and then we need to write the equation that it represents. So remember that we're starting at 0. So starting at 0, what direction do I move first? Well, that's towards the positive numbers, and I move 7 spaces. So I know that my first number is going to be 7. For my second number, I see that I'm moving back 10 spaces. If I'm moving towards the negative numbers, I know that my number has to be negative. And since I moved 10 spaces, my number is -10. Another way to know that it's negative is that if your number was positive, you would continue moving in this direction towards the positive numbers. And now I'm looking at my equation, I have 7 plus -10. And by looking at the number line, I can see that my answer is -3. And this is our last strategy using absolute value when we have different signs. So step number 1 is to find the absolute value of each number. So we have 8 and we have 10. Then we are to subtract the less value from the greater absolute value. So that means 10 minus 8, which equals 2. Then use the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. Well, 10 has the greater absolute value. What is the sign of 10? In the original problem, it is negative. Therefore, my answer is -2. And if you think about it, if you had a number line, you would start at 0 and move towards the positive 8 spaces. Then since you're adding -10, you're going to move in this direction 10 spaces, which would get you to -2. Here are your on your own questions for adding integers with different signs. Remember that you should practice using all 3 strategies. So there should be one solved with counters, one with a number line, and one using absolute value. For this third one, you can add the 2 numbers to get an answer, then add the third number to that one. Things to remember for today is when you're using absolute value and you have the same sign, You find the absolute value and then use the common sign. So if the common sign is positive, your answer will be positive. If the common sign is negative, your answer will be negative. If you have different signs, find the absolute value and subtract the smaller from the larger. Take the sign of the larger number. And don't forget, you can always use a number line or counters to solve your problem or to check your work.